Well, greetings James Bond fans, and this is it. This is the big ranking video, and it's starting right now. Now, I know I'm not the first person to say this, and I'm not going to pretend I am, but one of the things I really do love about the Bond franchise, and so many other great Bondians out there, is I just love the variety in the franchise. I really don't know any other franchise where you can go from something dark and gritty, such as a Casino Royale and License to Kill, to also at the same time having complete fun with a double-taking pigeon and laser fights in space. The variety in the James Bond franchise is one of the things I absolutely love about the whole series, and for me, with someone with ADHD, it's fantastic when if I'm in the mood suddenly for something dark and gritty, and 5 minutes later, now I'll go for something more light-hearted and fun and watch something else instead, and the Bond series gives that to me in spades and spades. I very much feel that this is definitely a rite of passage. It's finally time for me, as a real Bondian fan, a YouTuber, to finally give and present to you all my official ranking of all 25 James Bond movies. Now, a couple of things just before we start here. I want to get these right out of the way. Number one is, I actually don't dislike any James Bond film. I actually really like all of them, but to really, if you will, coin George Orwell's Animal Farm, all Bond films are equal, but some Bond films are more equal than others. That's purely it and simple. This is very much a me-only view ranking. This is my own thoughts, my own opinions, my own take on things that don't represent anyone else apart from my thoughts here. I want to make that very clear. So I'll mention this as the video goes on, but I do love in some ways, and certainly bits of every single James Bond film. It's just some I prefer more than others. Now, also to be fair here, I am not including in the list Casino Royale 1967 and the film Never Say Never Again. Now, the reason for that is simple. I feel it's not fair to compare these films, these unofficial James Bond films, to the actual official films in the franchise. Though, for the sake of just making sure I am covering all bases, allow me just quickly give you my ranking here. In 27, it would be Never Say Never Again. I think it is a fun film, it has a great Sean Connery performance, but it is just a pale imitation and lesser version, in my opinion, of Thunderball, so I don't really think it counts here. And when it comes to Casino Royale 1967, it is ridiculous. It is just, you have to lose all sanity in order to really enjoy it. But you know what, if you can just have maybe a couple of drinks, forget all your ambitions at the door and just lose yourself to the madness, it is actually quite a bit of a fun film and rather enjoyable. So, with that done out the way, it is time now for me to present to you all my ranking of all official James Bond films. Enjoy. So, something has to be at the bottom of the list here, and for me, like many others probably out there, it is the film Quantum of Solace. Now, going into this, as I mentioned earlier, I want to also mention good points as well as bad points, because even in the worst, in my opinion, on this list, there are some really good points, and there are some bits about Quantum of Solace I really like. I love the opera sequence in this movie, and the whole section at the Green Party. I think there's some really nice, great moments of James Bond. I even like the use of the title, A Measure of Comfort. I thought that was a really great idea if you're going to do a direct sequel to Casino Royale as the title for the film that follows it. And that's another thing I really like about this film. I like that they took a chance and actually finally did a direct sequel to a previous film. I think we all think back in the past, we wish that Diamonds Are Forever was more of a direct sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and you know what, they actually took a chance here and they actually did it. But outside of the things I mentioned, for me, this just film isn't working. I think the story and the script and the dialogue isn't really working here, and as many of you know, I really hate shaky cam and fast cutting. I really can't stand it when the camera just shakes the whole time, so you can't really see what's going on. And then they do quick cutting, thinking it looks dynamic and cool. It's something that the Bourne series started, and I hate it in the Bourne franchise, and I hate it that they did it to James Bond here, because films are a visual medium, and what you're doing here is just giving me a visual thing to watch, but I can't really watch or see what's going on. And even in all the action sequences when they're trying to do the quick cutting, I can't get into them because you're not allowing the film to breathe and show off all the amazing stuff that you've got in this film. So overall for me, yes, Quantum of Solace is number 25 and at the bottom of the list here, purely because I feel the way that it was made and the weak storyline compared to the others, I just feel it belongs here. But again, as I say, there are some actually good moments in it. At number 24, we have Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery's last one in the official series, and the thing that really actually annoys me about this film, I feel, is it just feels a bit tired and drawn out. Now, I'm going to say this as one of the big pluses of the movie compared to the book. I think that the movie is definitely better than the Ian Fleming original source material. That I will definitely give it here. I also love the characters of Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd. I think those two are some of the best characters the Bond series in general has ever produced when it comes to its villain slate. I love Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd. Whenever they appear on screen here, it just lights up the entire film and really adds a little bit of something to the film as well. I also think that the end sequence on the oil rig is really a good sort of finale to the film overall. I wish Blofeld had a better death in this, but you know, there are some really good moments here. But outside of that, for me, this film overall just feels a bit uninteresting. I think it starts off really well right at the beginning with a great mystery, but by halfway it's just gone all out the window. This is another thing for me about this film I've not really liked. Now, I know in the original source material book it's set in Las Vegas, and the film itself also sets himself in Las Vegas, so I can't complain about that. But for me, Las Vegas just doesn't feel like a great Bondian location. I think maybe back in the day it was maybe a bit more exotic, but it just feels a bit tacky for James Bond to go. It really, really does for me. I think Charles Gray in this film is completely underused and written completely wrong. I've said this many times before, but if you've ever seen a Hammer horror film called The Devil Rides Out, and you see Charles Gray there as the villain, and just think if he was allowed to do that and play Blofeld, it could have been something truly for the ages. But alas, this film really started a bit of a campy spin towards the Bond franchise, and it's just a shame that I feel like Charles Gray was so underused here. I also think Sean Connery here is not really putting as much effort in as he normally has in the past. Overall, just for me, Diamonds Are Forever, it just doesn't feel as exciting as other James Bond films. There's just too many things in here that for me aren't truly working. But again, I love Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd. I love the finale here as well. There is some good stuff in here, but just overall, I think this Bond film is a bit lacking. And now coming to number 23, and one of the films that scared the bejeebus out of me when I was a kid, License to Kill. Yep, I definitely saw this film too young, seeing Felix being fed to the shark, seeing Milton Crest's head exploding. Do you know what? This film terrified me, and now looking back at it, it is one of the things I do love about this film, how it is such a darker, more edgier James Bond film. And I think one of the highlights absolutely of this film is Robert Darí's Fran Sanchez. Definitely in the top 3 Bond villains of all time. He is menacing, smart, he is cunning, he is off-hinged, he is also in control. His whole aura in this film, I think, truly makes the film. And also, again, another great performance by one of my favourite Bonds in Timothy Dalton. So why does this film go so low on the list? Well, the truth of the matter is, I found it really hard to describe this, but then I heard great Bondian Joseph Darlington, I mentioned this in his review of it, which I have to firmly agree with. This film feels like a drug story with James Bond slotted in, not a James Bond film with a drug story. And that really is my biggest issue with the film. I don't feel like overall I'm watching a James Bond film. I feel I'm watching a film where James Bond and his Bond theme and other elements of Bond is being trying to shove in just to make you feel like you are watching a Bond film, when really this could be any sort of cinematic hero put in here. I think another great thing as well, just to mention here about it, is I think obviously we all love the finale with the tanker chase, which is absolutely brilliant here, and that is definitely, I think, one of the highlights of the film. But the rest of the film for me overall, it just feels a bit less polished than maybe other James Bond films, and that I come back to this because I really do believe this, that whole feeling of Bond is being shoved into the story here. It's not really truly a James Bond film. is my biggest crush and issue with the story. But overall, I still think it's worth a considerable watch, and I think it really into that darkness and that almost horror element of what Ian Fleming's creation's world had is a nice idea. So yeah, I'd still recommend this and give it a watch, but again, when you shove James Bond into a story instead of making a film around James Bond, that's the issue for me. Next on the list at 22 is A View to a Kill. Now, to be honest, I wish I could rank this film higher because there's a lot in this film I actually really like. Specifically, the villains. Christopher Walken and Grace Jones as Max Zorin and Mayday are just absolutely some of the highlights of the film. I love the fact that we got them as Bond villains, and they did such a great thing in this film. But the truth of the matter is, as much as I love this film, there are issues. Now, let's start off with the first one. Number one, this is clearly an updated version of Goldfinger. Set with gold, it's now with microchips. I can accept that. I can see it for plain to see. Does it affect me that much? A little bit, yeah, because I know it's just copying Goldfinger nearly, not shot for shot and word for word, but very clearly story and pacing wise. That to me is a bit of an issue here. And yes, let's talk about Roger Moore here. I've often made a joke that he's the very first Expendable, not Sylvester Stallone. And I stand by this in the film. At 57, playing Bond, you know, with that very, botched plastic surgery, he just looks awful. One of the things that Octopussy did very well, which will appear later on this list, is everyone got aged up a bit to match Roger Moore here. But it's now come to a stage in this film where some people are more aged up to suit Roger Moore's age, and some people, like the main Bond girl, which we'll get to in a minute, which are so young, it just feels cringeworthy. And that whole bit at the end of the shower, oh my god, just no. And that's the other thing. Can we just please talk about Stacey Sutton here? One of the worst Bond girls ever. I feel a bit bad for Tanya Roberts here because, you know what, she might not be the greatest actor in the world, but she can do better than this, and I think she just got some awful material here and just made the film slightly worse. So yeah, even though I can say hand on heart, I love A View to a Kill, I actually really enjoy it. I love the Duran Duran song. I don't mind it's a bit of a remake of Goldfinger in that sense, but you can't deny the action sequence is a bit lackluster. Too old Roger Moore here, and just it's just not enough really to get you nail biting and excited. But again, I still like this film, but yeah, it only ranks here on the list. At number 21, we have the film Spectre. You know what? Spectre started a whole describing of film in general I have, which basically means when a film, when it's good, it's like the best in a whole series, the best of all time. But when it's bad, it's like the worst ever in a movie. And I coined this film, it's a Spectre from this film. Same thing I gave to Star Wars The Last Jedi. But let me explain. In Spectre, there's some like best moments in the James Bond franchise. I'm talking about the pre-title sequence, which is great. The Spectre meeting, which is absolutely amazing. The fight sequence on the throne with Bond and Mr. Hinks, absolutely terrific. They're just some examples. But at the same time, there's some of the things, in my opinion, that's the worst in the entire franchise. I'm talking about the Bond-Blofeld relationship here in this film. It's just soap opera rubbish. I think the whole trying to hide the fact that it's un-Stavro Blofeld, that was just annoying. Come on, just accept the Spectre. You're not fooling anyone here. I think also in this film, the action sequences aren't just very exciting. They don't rev up. And the mystery about Spectre in this film is just played out so slow, and I think so uninteresting. I've known fans who aren't really a massive fan of the James Bond franchise. You know, they were like, yeah, we all know about Spectre in some capacity, in some way. You're not really hiding it very well. You're not reintroducing us to Spectre very well here. And I think that's also a big issue in this film. I also think here, in this film, we're obviously introduced to, for the Daniel Craig era, Madeleine Swann, who was meant to be, if you will, the Tracy of this universe. And I have to say, her introduction is absolutely terrible. If you were to tell me pre-watching this film that she was meant to be the Tracy of this universe after Vesper, I would have said you've done an absolutely terrible job. Luckily, the character, in my opinion, gets redeemed quite a bit later on in No Time to Die, later on this list here. But overall, as I say, Spectre is just such a mixed bag. The bits that are great are just fantastic, fabulous, some of the best you'll ever get in the Bond franchise, and that's why it's higher than some of the others here on this list. But at the same time, the worst parts of Spectre are some of the absolute worst ever in the entire franchise and the creator's decisions here. So yeah, that really sums up Spectre. On to the next one. So rounding up the bottom 5 at number 20, we have The Man with the Golden Gun. You know what? I am so annoyed at this film that I don't like it more. I really do, because I really want to love this film so much more every time I see it, and I think that's why I give it such leeway. The fact that you got Sir Christopher Lee, rest in peace, as one of the, in my opinion, best James Bond villains, a true upgrade from the original Ian Fleming novel, is just so fantastic, and he just saves this movie in so many ways. I love Scaramanga's Island and his funhouse and knick-knack, just absolutely incredible here. I love the locations and the action sequences and the overall, well, basically half the story of this film. That's where my big issue comes with The Man with the Golden Gun. I know Bond films like to be sort of relevant and up to date, and it's a good thing. It really is a good thing here. But the whole bit about Bond versus Scaramanga and like the world is the battleground sort of side of the story is fantastic. It's brilliant. It's intriguing. And every time they go to the energy crisis and the Solace, it just, in my opinion, just stops the movie dead in its tracks. I think as well this time, obviously, Bond films were trying to jump into latest trends. This one very much was into like the Kung Fu movies, and you know what, as a kid I loved it very much, and I do love Kung Fu movies, but as I get older I just look at it and feel this just feels really out of place. I don't think this is gelling very well with James Bond. And I think the biggest insult still, and I will die on this hill, is the awful use of a legendary actress, Britt Eklund, with her character Mary Goodnight, one of the most, if not the worst, James Bond leading lady. Literally, her whole persona, her whole mission in life from this film is to bonk Bond, bonk Bond. And I'm like, you are wasting Britt Eklund here, an absolutely incredible actress. Why are you doing this? Why? So you know what, again, Man with the Golden Gun, it's got so much stuff I really love. Really, half the movie is stuff I really love, but then the other half just literally either destroys the film, is terrible, stops it dead in its tracks. I wish The Man with the Golden Gun was so much better than it was, but alas, it is what we've got here. At number 19, we have, without a doubt, one of my guilty pleasures in the Bond franchise, Moonraker. You know what? I love Moonraker. I think it's sometimes overly a bit too funny, but at the same time almost thrilling and just brilliant. And I'm sorry, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and the idea of James Bond in space, bit of Star Wars he put in there as well, just fantastic for me. And you know, one of the biggest compliments I can actually give about Moonraker is you couldn't have done it with any other James Bond apart from Roger Moore. You couldn't have. It just wouldn't have worked the way they did it. And this film really tailors, I think, to that Roger Moore style, which is, I think, a great thing about this film. I also just want to have a quick mention here about the amazing pre-title sequence, because I think without a doubt this film has one of the top 3 pre-title sequences in the entire franchise. But with all that being said as well, there are for me quite a few issues with this film. I think the finale is actually quite good, but it does feel sometimes a bit too dragged on. I also think some of the other sequences in this film just don't really generate energy or excitement. I think the times when Bond is sleuthing in this film, it just goes a bit too slow and it just doesn't feel very engaging. I really want to get into the mystery of this film, but I just feel like every time I try to, it just doesn't want to let me. I also think here quite truly that the character of Dr. Holly Goodhead isn't just working for me. I think the character comes off a bit vanilla and a bit bland, which is a shame really, because I think there's a lot of interesting dynamics with this character. It just is not fitting in here at all. And I feel in comparison to Roger Moore, when you see them on screen together, I don't think there's any chemistry between them. So overall for me, Moonraker is without a doubt a guilty pleasure James Bond film, and I'm very happy to say it is there. But there are for me a lot of sort of niggling issues with the film, like the chemistry between the lead actor and the leading actress. Some of the excitement is not really there. The ending, I'd say, is actually fantastic, and the pre-title sequence is one of the top 3 of all time. So yeah, Moonraker is probably happily at this spot on the list. A very nice guilty pleasure. So, going from one guilty pleasure straight to another, we go into number 18, Die Another Day. And this, without a doubt, is probably my most highest guilty pleasure on this list, because truth of the matter is, I really do like Die Another Day. It was the first Bond film I saw in the cinema, okay? So I do have fond memories of it, and there are bits I really love about it. I love just the over-the-top lunacy of the film. You know, I love like the Ice Palace, I love the hovercraft chase sequence, I love Toby Stevens' Gustav Graves. He's so an over-the-top cartoon villain, and that to me really sums up how you can describe Die Another Day. It is like a cartoon James Bond film. I mean, for God's sake, why, when you have one of the most, I think, beautiful cars on that Aston Martin, do you turn it invisible? Why is Toby Stevens turning into some sort of Robocop right at the end? This film, I feel, is just like, with insanity still, the most complete lunacy you can have in a Bond film. I think this film, weirdly enough, is more sci-fi and loony than even Moonraker was, and that film went into space. I think as well, for me, one of the big things I don't like about this film is it's like a sum of two different parts. There's the first half of the movie, and yes, I know it does connect to things happening in the second half, but it feels like its own separate, completely different movie. And the second half is just so different from the first half. It's like when you transition from one to the other, it's just like, am I in the same film? Really? I can't honestly... What just happened here? So overall for me, Die Another Day Without Shadow is the high-ranking guilty pleasure on this list. I'm not gonna lie, it is not one of the greatest Bond films of all time. I think we can all accept that, and we can all admit that, but it is fun. It is a real cartoony James Bond film, and it does bring a smile on my face, even though I think there are tons of problems with it, and just really idiotic, why did you go down this route moments. But it's here at number 18 on the list. I feel happy about that. Let's go on to the next one. So next on the list here at number 17, we have Octopussy. Now, as a kid, I would have said this is just simply the James Bond film in India. But this is where I'm going to start saying this a few times in my list, where a film I didn't really appreciate as a child, I've come to rewatch over the years, reevaluate and rediscover almost, and there's going to be quite a few of those later on in this, and this is the first film really that sets it off, because now I think Octopussy is just an incredible espionage Cold War thriller that I didn't truly understand or probably appreciate when I was younger. Now, there are a lot of things here I really do love. I love the setting of India, that's fantastic. Maud Adams here as Octopussy is just absolutely killing it. Really, really incredible. And of course, you have the train sequence. And you know me, if you follow me for a long time, James Bond on the train equals just cinematic gold for me. It really, really does. And I love the safari sequence in this movie. Really fantastic. Really wonderful. I love the Tarzan yelp and the Sid. It's all really fantastic. All ending with that lovely line by Louis Jourdan. Mr. Bond is a very rare breed, soon to be extinct. Absolutely wonderful. But outside of that, for me, this film does have problems, and I think the biggest problem for me is a bit similar to Die Another Day, is that the film is almost two different films put together. I think the whole section at the beginning with the Fabergé Eggs feels like one film, and then the whole bit of the nuclear bomb at the end is a whole second film. Now, in comparison to Die Another Day, they do weave the stories so much closer in this film, which I do give it points here. But it does still feel like two different films. I think Louis Jourdan, great actor, not one of the best Bond villains. I think Gobinda, really great when you're watching the film, but really actually forgettable outside of that. And do you know what? That's really my summing up, really, of Octopussy here. It's a great, entertaining, fantastic Cold War thriller while you're watching the film. But as soon as the film's over, you had a great time. And for me, it just doesn't leave such a memorable imprint as other James Bond films later on and higher up on this list. At number 16, we have from the Bond film in India to the Bond film in Japan, You Only Live Twice. And I've always really had a bit of a soft spot for You Only Live Twice. I really do actually quite enjoy this film. I've always wanted to go visit Japan, and Bond in Japan really does fire for me on all cylinders. I love the locations, the look and the feel of this movie, and come on, we've got to start off with this. We've all talked about it a million times. The volcano lair. It's incredible. It's cinematic. It's history. That whole set and the whole sequences inside it are just spectacular. It's absolutely incredible. It is definitely the highlight of the film. Now, take away all that amazing volcano lair and the Japan, you are left, I think, with a very mixed bag of a film. Let's start off with our main man, Sean Connery here, and I think it's fair to say we all know the behind-the-scenes drama going on with this film if you're watching this ranking, and you know Sean Connery wasn't really happy, and it's very clear to see he's not giving his utter greatest performance here. But on the other side of that, we've also got, in my opinion, again, one of the most definitive performances in cinema history, which is Donald Pleasance's Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Come on, we all know it, we all love it, it is all fantastic, and it does live up to so many great things. There are some really great moments here in Live Twice, as I mentioned, like in previous films we've talked about here so far. You know, you've got the little Nelly sequence, I talked about the finale to it, but really outside of that, when I think about You and Live Twice, it's more about silly little issues, I think, that are propping up. I think the whole thing about turning Bond Japanese was just weird. I think we all sort of really feel that way. I think a lot of this film sort of drags, and because some of the stars I don't think are giving their best performances, you can't just get emotionally involved in this film as others. So yeah, for me, You Only Live Twice its hardware is fantastic, but the software that's sort of running the hardware is just not firing on all cylinders. I watch this film more for the spectacle of what visually I'm seeing on screen, not so much the story and most of the characters, and I think for a lot of people it probably does feel the same. And number 15, and probably surprise to a few, is For Eyes Only. Considering I've often lauded this film as one of the best Roger Moore, it's not his best performance as James Bond, why is it so low on this comparison to maybe others later on? Well, the reason is because I really do love this film, and I make no lie and I make no pretense about it. A lot of people say nowadays that For Eyes Only is Roger Moore's From Russia with Love, and that's something I fully agree with. Very much so. This is a real hardcore Fleming-esque James Bond story, and it brings a lot of the James Bond elements in. You know, we've got the sequence from Live and Let Die, the novel, with Bond being tied up in the shark. You've got many characters from the novel For Eyes Only coming in here, and a bit of Ricissico. You've really got what feels like a real old school James Bond story with Bond relying on his wits, and that's something I think the Bond series needs to do a bit more, and it has been doing a bit more recently, which I'm very glad to say. So, you know what, there are really amazing stuff in this film, so why is it only ranked here at number 15? Well, the reason is purely because there are some great moments in it, and again, I said this is Roger Moore's best performance in my opinion. Not everything surrounding him, I think, is living up to that greatness. Meaning, like, for example, I don't think Julian Glover, great actor, he has not been given one of the best Bond villains here, and I think his Bond villain is slightly weak. I think as well that, you know, all the villains in this film are really sort of slightly weak and not that interesting. I know a lot of people love Milena Havelock as a great Bond leading lady. I have to say I disagree. It was interesting but just not enough done with her. That being said, the chemistry between her and Roger Moore is very clearly there, and I love the sequences when they're together. You've got obviously, you know, Pierce Brosnan's ex-wife, may she rest in peace in there. Really that whole bit with her I think just sort of stops the movie flat, and it just, the whole film would be better in my opinion without it. So yeah, for me, For Eyes Only is a great spy espionage thriller. It's Roger Moore's best performance, but overall it's just not equaling his greatness. So, at number 14 we have Roger Moore's first Live and Let Die. And you know what, even from when I was a child, this was one of my favourite films. I've always really loved Live and Let Die. I think there's a lot of really great stuff in here. I mean, the thing that jumps out to me very much is the crocodile farm and the boat chase that follows it. You've got some really great characters here in Dr. Kananga and Teehee and Baron Samedi and Solitaire. Some really, really fantastic characters that really, I think, elevate this film. But for me, the biggest thing that brings this film down, I just feel it isn't grand enough or big enough for a Bond film. I felt that this film's scope was just a bit too low. Now sometimes I don't mind it in Bond films where they don't always have, you know, the structure of the world, storylines. I sometimes like it when they just go a little bit smaller and something a bit more, if you will, sort of just affecting one particular thing, such as, you know, example being Goldfinger, just Goldfinger wanting to raid Fort Knox. But here, I just don't feel the stakes are really high, or even about the whole drug storyline. It's almost relegated to something else. It's not really brought up that much. I mean, yes, of course, you can't deny the amazing title song by Paul McCartney here, and it is one of the highlights of the film. I think this is one of those few moments where something from the Bond verse has sort of really entered the public domain headspace, and everyone knows the song Live and Let Die just as much as well. Roger Moore's first performance for James Bond is a very good, competent one. I think he's still working out how to play the character in this film a bit more, and you can sort of see the early beginnings of what the Roger Moore James Bond is, but it's still not quite right. It's still not quite there yet, but you can certainly see it growing. So overall for me, Live and Let Die is one of my favourite James Bond films. I really like it. I think the whole characters and the sequences in the film really elevate it, but the main, if you will, plot line of this film, again, just brings it down. I just don't think it's grand enough or big enough for a villain's storyline here. So yep, I'm very happy with it here, and I again would recommend it. So, at number 13, we have Dr. No. Now, I'm going to start off by saying this about Dr. No. A lot of people call it a very vanilla, very basic, generic Bond film, and you know what? I think that's true from a modern day perspective, but also I think slightly unfair to this film. This is the film that set the template. This was so different and cutting edge and different back in the 60s. I always remember what Timothy Dalton says about this film. Bond was the meanest, dirtiest, nastiest hero they'd ever seen at the time, and you've got to think about the film from that perspective. This film set the template, really, for spy films going forward. So to say it is very vanilla and generic by modern day, I get it, but at the same time I don't think it is. And even within that idea, saying it's very basic and generic, I think is actually okay, because this is the film, even though I think it has tons of character and tons of personality, it sets the bar, it sets the, if you will, line of excellence for a James Bond film that all others try to beat afterwards. And some obviously clearly did, because there's further ones up on my list, and some I think got incredibly close. I really like Dr. No. I think overall the characters are just incredible. Let's just talk about Dr. No here. He is stunning, one of the best villains, and again sets the bar for Bond villains going afterwards. You have Quarrel, who I think sets the bar for Bond's allies, along with Felix Leiter's introduction in this film. You have obviously the beginnings of M and Moneypenny, us learning these characters in this film. This film is so actually really incredible, and the mystery of Dr. No and Crowd Key really keep the film going through. You've also got Ursula Andress, the, if you will, template and one of still the best James Bond leading ladies. What an incredible character, and what an incredible act to follow that so many have tried to do. She was just fantastic in this movie. I think if I had to have a criticism of the film, and it would be the only criticism, is I feel that the finale of this film is a bit weak. Now, compared to the book, believe me, I know they should have never do what happened in the book. But at the same time, I wish there was something just a little bit more. I know this wasn't big budget, or probably just under medium budget, but I wish there was something a bit more dramatic at the end. So overall for me, I think people's complaints about Dr. No are understandable, but I think it's a terrific film. Great personality, great character, great story, great performances. Sean Connery clearly from the beginning has got this character down, and I just really, really enjoy it. So at number 12, we have The World Is Not Enough. I think one of the most underrated James Bond films, but at the same time, to me, one of the most annoying. Now, this film has just tons of character, charm and sophistication and great intrigue. I think, again, Sophie Marceau's villain is absolutely incredible here. The sequences in this film, come on, we cannot deny that Q-boat chase sequence is just a work of action suspense genius here. Pierce Brosnan, without a shadow of doubt, I feel in this film is giving his best performance and almost the near perfect performance of James Bond in this film. There are so many great things about this film, but that is really where the compliments end with this film. I think that this film is truly the sum of its parts. There are sections in this film. This film really is just about a lot of sections, and the sections individually are terrific. They're really, really great, and that's why I think I rank it so highly. But if you put it all as a convenient whole, I just don't think it's quite working. I think the whole bits between Bond and Renard aren't as great as they could be. I think as well the structure of this film doesn't quite work as well, but why do I rank it so high? I really come back to it again. It's the performances, it's the sections and the sequences in this film, it's the banter, it's the laughter. There really is just some ultimate really amazing stuff in this film, which for me, you just want to watch again and again and again. So yeah, Wasn't Enough for me is ranked here on the list, I think very nicely. I think a really great James Bond film. I think it has some problems here, but it's worth watching again and again and again just for all those amazing things that you have in this movie. So yeah, definitely go and check this one out. No Time to Die. You know what, I think this film understandably is polarising for many different reasons. Bond having a kid, Bond dying at the end, and there's many other things contributing to it. But you know what, I really did feel this was an amazing James Bond film. I really did absolutely enjoy it. I remember seeing it finally when it came on the big screen. There's this whole feeling of the wait was worth it and it didn't disappoint. Another really big thing I love about this film, and it is a real personal thing to me, is the whole topic of germ warfare. I think germ warfare is terrifying, and this film really, I feel, shows why I think it's terrifying and exploits it for so many great reasons. I also think I love Safin, Rami Malek's bad guy here. I really love the maniacal villain here. It was fun to see something like that again. Rami Malek just chews the scenery and just so enjoys it. And I think the pacing of this film is really good. I think the mystery about Heracles really unfolds incredibly well, and it goes from beat to beat to beat. It doesn't feel rushed, doesn't feel overextended, and it really does feel like a spy espionage mystery thriller for the most part, and then leading to the big, if you will, finale. So it really works for me in that level. And again, let me just bring up here as well the other cast. If you've got Léa Seydoux's character here, who, as I mentioned previously down further on the list, I didn't think she was done really well in Spectre. It's just made up for here in this film. Madeleine Swann here as a character is so intriguing, and I really do enjoy her in this movie. Quite the reverse opposite to what it was like in Spectre. And do you know what? I'll say this here very quickly. I was on COK with Bond's death and No Time to Die. For me, this was the death of the Daniel Craig James Bond, not the death of James Bond in general. So yeah, overall for me, No Time to Die is a great mixture of fun, exciting, thrilling James Bond espionage film, mixed with some great action, some great writing, great comedy all around. I could go on much more about this, but for me, definitely worth the spot here. So to start off our number 10 list, we have Casino Royale, and what a great film in my opinion to start off this list. You know, when this film came out, it really was such a 180 from Die Another Day, and it's very weird watching Die Another Day then going straight into Casino Royale. It is a weird sensation, but this film, as I said, was a breath, I think, of fresh air in the franchise, and it was trying to do something bold and different, which I give a lot of credit for. There's so much, I think, really to love about this film. Let's start off with Daniel Craig here. I think he gives a good first performance as James Bond. It's a bit unfair because his character is sort of becoming James Bond as the film progresses, and I take that into consideration here, but this film, I think, what I love about it was it felt so modern at the time, but at the same time, it really did feel like we were adapting the Casino Royale story. It was a true Ian Fleming thriller, while being so modern, I feel, at the same time. My god, the parkour sequence is just amazing. The poker sequence, look, I'm a massive poker fan, I will openly admit it, and they were nail-biting, they were intense. Yes, the hands were a bit of the top, but come on, it was just incredible to see. And just again, just finally seeing, I feel, Casino Royale done right. I think that was one of the big feelings I came out of watching this the first time, to finally see a faithful adaptation. I also feel here the cast was just spot on. Mads Mikkelsen as Le Chiffre, I think, definitely goes down in history as one of the best Bond villains of all time. Eva Green's Vesper Lynd is definitely one of the greatest Bond female leading ladies of all time. And for me, this whole film is just firing on all cylinders here. It really does, I think, an amazing job. It's one of those Bond films that I feel you can rewatch again and again and again and still get the same enjoyment out of it. So yeah, definitely for me a great way to start off the number 10 slot on the list here. Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's first, and let's get on to number 9. We have Tomorrow Never Dies. I think one of the most, and for me, the most underrated James Bond film. This film, I think, is so underappreciated, and it is absolutely incredible. Let me just start off the bat here with the amazing pre-title sequence that really is an absolute banger, and then having a story around media moguls wanting to generate news and doing what it means to get news and getting broadcasting rights and starting wars. It's absolutely fantastic. I also love how this goes into a bit of Bond's Navy history as well, and has that part of him show up here again. I always love it in the series when Bond goes into that area. And you know, I love Tomorrow Never Dies so much. It's such a thrill ride. It's such a good spy thrill as well. I think one criticism I will have about it here, and I will say, is it is on probably one of the shortest James Bond films, and I do think sometimes it does speed through too fast. But for me, the good just outweighs the bad. I talked about some of the sequences there, but then you've got the whole remote control car chase with the BMW. That was terrific, even though I hate BMWs. You've got the amazing sequence at the end on the stealth boat. You've got the motorcycle chase. And that's just some of the really great stuff to accompany, I think, a really great Bond villain story. And again, just looking at the cast here, you know, you've got Jonathan Pryce as such a great campy villain that has also a real side of menace. You have Dr. Gunter, you have Stamper, and then now let's just go on to the Bond leading ladies. You have the great actress Michelle Yeoh as a Bond leading lady who can really kick ass. You know how I think a lot of Bond films like to do that Bond's meshes match character? This is where it actually does work, and done superbly. You've also got Terry Hatcher in here doing an absolutely wonderful job. Oh, do you know, there's just, to me, so many great things about Tomorrow Never Dies, and for me it is still the most unappreciated James Bond film. Of all the films in this, I want you to go and rewatch Tomorrow Never Dies again and really re-examine it, because I think it's absolutely wonderful. And coming up at number 8 is the James Bond classic, the standard if you will. It is definitely Goldfinger, and there isn't that much new stuff I can say about Goldfinger, but heck, I'm going to try anyway here. I think Goldfinger represents a cultural milestone in cinema, not just Bond history, cinema. It is a cornerstone of what people, I think, from generation to generation have tried to imitate and be as good in Goldfinger. And you know what? I think sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail. It is that much of a crucial pop culture milestone, and I think it has great reason to be, because overall the story really follows well. This is one of those Bond films where the villain and Bond know that each other are rivals, and they enjoy playing with each other so much in the film, and it's something I really do enjoy watching over and over. This film just goes, I think, from strength to strength to strength to strength. It really does. It starts off fantastic and just goes into the next fantastic scene one after the other. This is, for me, a masterclass in writing, and also I think intelligent writing. I think one of my favourite moments in this film is where Bond and Goldfinger are just discussing the plan and actually having a big conversation about it, and Bond is actually realising Goldfinger's a bit of a genius here with it, and actually gives him a bit of respect. It's so incredible. But we also, you know, we've got to talk about so much other here. Gert Frobe's Goldfinger is without a doubt historic and just incredible. He was such a great actor. Oddjob is one of the most definitive henchmen of all times. Pussy Galore is one of the most definitive henchwomen and Bond leading ladies of all time. You know, that is really the word, I think, to describe Goldfinger. A lot of people try to go against that word and feel it's overused or it's not done right, but for me, I think Goldfinger is a true moment in history where that word definitive is earned and is needed to say, because the Aston Martin DB5 definitive, the song Goldfinger is definitive, the acting is definitive, Sean Connery's performance is definitive in this film. It is without a doubt just an amazing Bond film, and it truly is. The next ones further up on the list, just for me, are better than this film in my opinion, and the ones maybe I might enjoy, but you know, you can't deny historical use of Goldfinger. At number 7, how do you top Goldfinger? Well, the next film in my opinion did it in Thunderball. I'm going to say this right off the bat here. I feel that Thunderball did everything Goldfinger did, but just did it slightly better for my taste buds. I think Guy Hamilton is a great Bond director, but bringing Terence Young back and giving his style and his virtues into a big epic, building off Goldfinger, to me, just created, in my opinion, one of the best Bond films there is out there. I love the story, I love Spectre's plan here, and I've always just had this big thing of loving Thunderball, and I've really tried to wonder why over the years it is. And I think it's come down to two things. I think legitimately Spectre's plot and the stakes in this film are just at the right level and at the right moment in time. That it really does, I think, affect a lot of things. And I also think that there is such memorable moments in Thunderball that go a bit unappreciated. We know about the great jetpack sequence in this film, we all know that, but I think the underwater cinematography here really works well. I'm a bit of a sucker for underwater based movies, you know, like Avatar 2 and Sanctum and stuff, and for me, a bit of an underwater Bond adventure really does hit me hard as something I'm just maybe too overly enjoying. I think Emil Largo here is just done so incredibly well with Adito Ficelli. The actress of Domino and the character Domino is just definitely one of the most stunning James Bond leading ladies of all time. The action is terrific. It has a slightly more darker edge here than Goldfinger. Again, bringing back Terence Young as the director here just gives it that. And I feel the film really thrives on that bit of menace that it's bringing. Just for me, Thunderball is just one of those films. I know some people out there aren't really big fans of it, and I can get that. I can really get and understand why, but for me, I always have loved Thunderball. It's a great film from start to finish. I just love watching this film again and again, so yeah, this is why it ranks so high on my list, and I always say, I gotta love Thunderball. At number 6, we have George Lazenby's Bond film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and this is definitely the film out of all the films in the franchise that has grown on me over the years, because when I was young, I didn't like this film at all. I mean, I really didn't like it. I felt it was boring, it was dull, and I wasn't interested in the love story that much. So if this was a ranking when I was doing it as a kid, it would have been very much down near the bottom of the list. But you know what? After years and years of watching this film and really seeing the subtleties, the actual great story and the different source story that is being portrayed here, I have to stand by. This is actually just one of those fantastic James Bond films I think was sorely underrated at its time. And I know that's not new saying that, but for me, it absolutely is. I think the love story between Bond and Tracy here is just so beautiful. It's just absolutely incredible. And when I was younger, I always felt it like slowed the story down. Now, as much as the Bond versus Blofeld storyline here, I can't wait when I'm watching it to watch that next bit between Bond and Tracy. It's just such a beautiful build up here. So when unfortunately the ending does happen, it really does gut punch you. And I also want to give here, I think, a little praise, well actually quite a big praise, to George Lazenby. Look, is he in the top high-ranking actors who have played James Bond for me? No, but he only got one stint at it. But you know what? Fair credit to him. He's only done the role once, but he has left an impression already. I've often said many times I would have loved to see him do more James Bond films. But unfortunately, alas, this is the end we did. But what a great one to do. Just everything about this film is wonderful. The cinematography and natural lighting is just incredible. Why did Pete Hunt not direct more Bond films? The action sequences are terrific, the storyline is absolutely wonderful, Pitt's Glory is just absolutely amazing. I love On Her Majesty's Secret Service now. It's one of those actually Bond films I will watch now so much again and again and again and again, and I'm so glad I've now got this great appreciation for it. Just a wonderful James Bond film and a real highlight and crown jewel, I think, in the franchise. There's a reason it's one of Christopher Nolan's, if not his favourite James Bond film. It's a reason that people are really truly re-evaluating it. Just absolutely wonderful on all cylinders. To Diana Rigg, Tell Us About Us, just everything. Wonderful, great movie. And starting off the top 5 is Timothy Dalton's other James Bond film, his first film, The Living Daylights. And you know what? This film is magnificent. I'm going to start off right here about talking about Timothy Dalton's performance here. This man, literally, in this film, is James Bond. There is no denying it whatsoever. He is a modern James Bond, but he is also, I think, the most faithful adaptation from the original Ian Fleming novels of James Bond here. Timothy Dalton is just killing it here, and there's a reason he's one of my absolute favourite actors to play Bond, and you just have to look at this film. The Living Daylights really packs an almighty fantastic punch and really has, I think, great lasting appeal and incredible sequences. It has incredible characters in this film. I'm sorry, I know some people might say that the villain here is a bit of a weak one, but I would disagree so much entirely. When you first meet, you know, Koskov, you just think he's like going to be this great ally, this great friend, right up there with Felix Leiter and Quarren and stuff, and then he turns out to be the villain. It's a great twist. I loved Koskov at the beginning of the film here, and it just showed how much amazing, I think, stuff he really did. It was wonderful here. The whole sequences in Tangier, the whole ice fighting on the car is just wonderful here. It's just everything here, I think, is absolutely buzzing. The soundtrack by A.H.A. is absolutely incredible. Maria d'Abo's Bond girl here is such a nice welcome change from a lot of that we were getting recently. And this film, do you know what? This is one of the big praises I want to give this film. This film, I think, is so good in its story. It really does feel like it was an original Ian Fleming novel turned into a film. That's one of the biggest praises I feel I can give this movie. It felt so Fleming-ish and so incredible. Just, you know what, this whole film, I think, is absolutely brilliant. I love The Living Daylights with a passion. It's a great film to watch. It's exciting, it's intriguing, it's a great spy thriller. The finale in the desert is absolutely incredible. The casting and the characters are just so good. Oh, I love The Living Daylights so much. Up at number 4, it is The Spy Who Loved Me, and this definitely for me is Roger Moore's best James Bond film, because I think this is the one where they really got the balance right for him. The mixture of the real hardcore James Bond character mixed with the Roger Moore style, it blends superbly. And you know what, I didn't watch this film a lot as a kid. I really didn't. I was terrified of Jaws. I'm not afraid to admit that. I had nightmares about this character coming after me, so I didn't watch it that much. And I think I rewatched it a bit when I finally entered my teenage years, and it was just like, this was like one of those ultimate treats as a Bond fan. I got to rediscover this film, and it just lived up to every moment. I think let's just go through it from the start here. The amazing pre-title sequence and that ski jump, absolutely incredible. The whole locations of Egypt and Sardinia are just absolutely wonderful. Strongbird's lair, Atlantis, and the tanker are just incredible set pieces here. This is Lewis Gilbert firing on all cylinders. For me, a lot of people say he's just copying a bit of You Only Live Twice. I disagree. I think he's taking what he learned from You Only Live Twice and just making it 10 times better. One of the things I just love about this story as well, it's a little thing here, but I think it just adds so much to the menace of Stromberg as a villain. Normally in the films up to this point, we've been expecting that, you know, we're doing it, you know, you give me $1 million and I won't do it, blah, 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 and all that stuff. Here, there's none of that, no extortion. He just wants to destroy the world. He doesn't care. There's no sort of money or anything that's going to change his mind. He's going to do it, and that, I think, makes him absolutely frightening. The story here just works on so many levels. Again, like I've said many times with other films in this list further down, the pacing here is just incredible. This is a bit of a longer Bond film, but it just flows. But I think one of the highlights here is the relationship between Bond and the leading lady, Major Anya Massiver. We all know the film, we all know the tension that is around them, but Barbara Bach and Roger Moore play off each other so well. I wish we got Major Anya Massiver as a recurring character and we got to see more of her, because she was such an incredible character. This was the film that, if you will, started the Bond equal character, and I think still, again, a bit like I said, Dr. No set the standard for Bond villains, she set the standards for this sort of type of Bond leading lady. The Spy Who Loved Me is just absolutely fantastic. We all know that. That's why it's so high up on the list, and we all agree, I think, that Spy Who Loved Me is one of those great James Bond films. I don't think there's no denying that. Just this was one of those films where everything was firing on all cylinders and it just truly worked. At number 3, we have From Russia with Love. Now, as I said in the bit of intro to the top 10, number 3 and 2 really do switch places quite a bit, but at the moment, this is where I put it. And do you know what? Again, as I said, that Goldfinger was definitive, which I still very much firmly stand by. From Russia with Love is just as much definitive, but in a separate reason. I think Goldfinger is the definitive James Bond movie phenomenon, the, if you will, the gold standard of the James Bond films, but From Russia with Love, I stand by, is the definitive spy thriller. Now, I really do mean that. I think From Russia with Love is as near a perfect spy thriller as you could possibly come up with. It's just an incredible movie with incredible performance. The whole, if you will, spying on the spies and knowing you're spying, and the games playing between the two, and then Spectre added in there so wonderfully well, all for this Lecter decoding machine. It's just such an incredible film with such excitement and intrigue. One of the things I just love about this film is it doesn't require big action sequences, and it does have them. It keeps excitement and the tension even just by the smaller scenes, by the spying and the little things in the film. I put this as a great example. The whole sequence with Bond and his rifle gadget just waiting for the assassin to come out. That is still, I think, one of the most nail-biting tension scenes in the Bond franchise, and it's even better, I think, than even the finale part of the film, and that is still absolutely incredible here. I think this film is just incredible, and again, a Bond film I love to watch again and again and again and again, which is a big factor when I think of lists and where I put them on said list, and For Russia of Love clearly ticks that box. I think Sean Connery's performance here is fantastic. Him against Robert Shaw, I mean, that's just cinematic history as well in the making here. The whole sequence on the train, I think this is where I get my obsession of Bond on the train, because it's done so well here. Every time I see Bond on the train in the later movie, I got more excited about it, such as in Octopussy and other films that will come up later in the top 2 of this list. From Russia of Love is without doubt definitive again. For a different reason, Goldfinger, this is the definitive spy thriller in my opinion. It's amazing, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, everything about it fires on all cylinders, characters, cast, just wonderful. At number 2, we have Skyfall. Do you know why this is number 2 here? Well, I'll tell you why. If you've been following this list, you might have realised what could potentially be number 1, and we will get to it. But for me, the number 1 slot is the gold platinum standard of Bond, the Bond film I compare all others to, and Skyfall's the one for me that nearly almost beat it. I'd reckon if it had the actor who was in the number 1 slot in this film, it might have even potentially beat it here. I thought we'd never get a film like Skyfall again. I think Skyfall really follows in the vein of number 3 slot from Russia of Love as a modern day espionage spy thriller. It's not all about the big action sequences, and there are them in there when they're needed, but this was a real dirty, on the ground spy mystery espionage thriller, and done so wonderfully, I have to say. And I think the whole plot line of Bond is Bond relevant, is MI6 relevant to the modern day, was done so well here, and I think it's also a tribute to us Bond fans in a way of why we love this world. The reintroduction of Moneypenny and Q here are done so incredibly well, but definitely one of the highlights I think for the film is Javier Bardem's Silva. Silva is definitely again in the top 3 Bond villains of all time, right up there with Franz Sanchez, and I won't name the other one here just yet. He's just menacing, terrifying, clear inspiration from Heath Ledger's Joker a bit, but just done so incredibly well, and a lot of the film is, if you will, the mystery of this character, and when you finally get to see him, it delivers on that, and it goes even further with it. This film as well delivers on digital terrorism. Digital terrorism again is something I think is quite terrifying and something not taken seriously, and I think this film shows the reason why digital terrorism should actually be taken a bit more seriously and the dangers it forms. Skyfall just was such a joy and beyond when I saw it in the cinema. It was just incredible. I thought, oh my god, this is just amazing. This is a whole new level tier James Bond film. I never thought I'd see a Bond film going back to the old From Russia with Love style of espionage spy thriller, and this film delivered on that in so many ways. And taking the top spot on my list, number 1, if you hadn't guessed already, Goldeneye, the platinum standard James Bond film for me, the one I compare all others to, and the one I still love the absolute most. I think this film is just, well, it's just absolutely perfection for me. It really is. It is one of the best standards of taking from the novel James Bond film and the best of the movie James Bond and putting it all together in this just truly amazing film. It has, I think, again, another one of the top 3 James Bond villains in 006, Alex Trevelyan. A great, if you will, personal connection between James Bond, and better than something like, Blofeld being, his brother or stuff like that, which was, I think, just utterly ridiculous. But this was a real interesting thing. This is your best friend who is now the villain. It's such an interesting thing. One of my favourite moments in Goldeneye is where Bond's sitting on the beach talking to, the Bond leading lady here, Natalia, and she asks him, why you're like this, why are you so cold? And he just simply says, it keeps me alive. Oh god, guys, it just gives me goosebumps every time. The storyline is incredible, the action sequence, the script is just so punchy, full of great one-liners like beg your pardon, forgot to knock, and great, really fierce, dramatic moments here. The action sequences from the pre-title sequence, the tank sequence, these are like modern day legendary things. And the whole connotations and surrounding material with Goldeneye. Let's not forget the N64 game that revolutionised gaming as well here as a part of it. Goldeneye, I also think, is one of the most important, if not the most important James Bond films, because this came after a 6-year hiatus after License to Kill. The Cold War had ended, Bond's playing ground had basically gone. This is the film that decided whether Bond could continue and carry on with a modern day perspective. And you know what? It delivered in spades. If you are a big fan of Daniel Craig or a big fan of his films or any films that came afterwards, you owe, in my opinion, a debt of gratitude to Goldeneye, because Goldeneye proved that Bond could continue in the modern world. It really is, I think, that much of an important James Bond film. So yeah, Goldeneye, without a shadow of a doubt, for its legacy, its inspirations for me, my first James Bond film. I think the Bond film I still rate and compare all others to. It is definitely my favourite, and probably will be, unless some really most utterly amazing Bond film comes down the line, will always be, at the moment, my favourite James Bond film. So everyone, that is my list of all 25 James Bond film rankings, from Quantum of Solace at 25 to Goldeneye at number 1. I hope you really enjoyed it. Please do give me a like, comment and subscribe. It really helps as well to the channel. And don't forget to comment down below and tell me your ranking list, even whether it's your top 5, your top 10 or your whole 25. Legitimately, I really want to know. So until next time, I'm the Bond Geek. Goodbye.